The first time I heard the footsteps, I told myself I was dreaming. It's the only explanation that makes sense, even now. It's the story I try to tell myself when I'm staring at the ceiling at 3 in the morning, listening to the hum of a new refrigerator in a new apartment, 1,000 miles from Chicago. But I wasn't dreaming. I know that with a certainty that has burrowed deep into my bones. The sound was soft, hesitant, a weight settling on an old floorboard followed by a faint, dry creak, then silence, then another closer to the foot of my bed. It was a slow, deliberate shuffle, the kind of sound someone makes when they're trying not to be heard. My eyes snapped open in the pitch dark of my bedroom. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a sudden, violent percussion in the dead quiet of the night. I lay perfectly still, a statue carved from fear, my ears straining against the silence. Every nerve ending was on fire. I held my breath, listening for the sound to repeat, for my brain to process it and file it away as something mundane. The radiator hissing. The upstairs neighbor, a med student who kept bizarre hours. The building settling. But the sound didn't come again. There was only the profound, suffocating silence of my apartment. I lived on the 10th floor of a pre-war building in Lakeview. My bedroom window faced a sheer brick wall, the gap between buildings a chasm of darkness. The fire escape was on the other side of the apartment, off the living room, and the window leading to it was always locked. My front door was fitted with a heavy deadbolt, the kind with a long, thick bar of steel. I had locked it before going to bed. I always did. It was part of my nightly ritual. Check the stove, turn off the lights, lock the deadbolt, every single night. There was no one else in the apartment. There couldn't be. Slowly, deliberately, I let my breath out. My mind, grasping for logic, landed on the most plausible explanation. It was a dream, a hypnagogic hallucination, the brain playing tricks on the edge of sleep. I'd read about it. Auditory hallucinations are common. I repeated the words to myself like a mantra, hypnagogic hallucination. It sounded clinical, safe. It stripped the fear from the experience, repackaging it as a biological quirk. Satisfied, or at least pretending to be, I rolled over, squeezed my eyes shut, and forced myself back to sleep. But I knew even then that the sound had been too real, too distinct. It had a weight and a texture that dreams just don't have. It was the sound of a physical body moving through a physical space. My space. My life in Chicago was deliberately quiet. I worked as a freelance user interface designer, which is a fancy way of saying I spent 8 to 10 hours a day staring at a screen, arranging pixels so people could more easily buy things they didn't need. The work was remote, which suited me. I'm not antisocial, but I value my solitude. My apartment was my sanctuary. A one-bedroom on the 10th floor, it was just big enough for me. The building, the Ardmore, was one of those handsome old brick structures with a marble lobby that had seen better days and a cage elevator that groaned and shuddered its way up. My unit had character. The hardwood floors were original, a dark, warm cherry color that had been scuffed and scarred by decades of previous tenants. They also creaked. I knew every one of their groans, every one of their complaints. There was the spot by the kitchen that whined if you stepped on it too quickly, the one in the hall that popped like a knuckle, and the long, low moan the boards in the living room made when the temperature changed. I knew the sounds of my home. The footsteps I'd heard that night weren't among them. They were alien, an invasive species of sound. The apartment itself was a simple layout. You walked in the front door to a short hallway. To the left was the small galley kitchen, to the right the bathroom. Straight ahead, the hallway opened up into the living room, a large rectangular space with two big windows that looked out over the endless grid of the city. My bedroom was off the living room through a single door. It was my nest, my safe place. From my 10th floor perch, the chaos of the city was reduced to a gentle, ambient hum. The wail of a distant siren, the rumble of the L train a few blocks away, it was the city's lullaby. I felt insulated, protected by the 10 stories of steel and concrete beneath me. I was an island in the sky. That feeling of safety was the first thing to be eroded. A few days after the first incident, I'd mostly managed to convince myself it was nothing. I was working late on a project, fueled by stale coffee and the looming pressure of a deadline. It was almost 2 a.m. when I finally shut my laptop. I stretched, my back cracking in protest, and walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water. As I stood at the sink, I glanced at the knife block on the counter. It was a app wooden block that held 5 knives. I'd bought it at a department store when I first moved in. I was not a cook, but it felt like something an adult should own. Something was wrong with it. It took me a second to realize what it was. The chef's knife, the largest one in the set, was in the wrong slot. It was in the slot meant for the slender bread knife. I stared at it, my mind refusing to compute. I distinctly remembered using the bread knife a couple of days earlier to slice a bagel, and I remembered washing it and putting it back in its proper, long slot. I was meticulous about things like that. My brain was a mess of code and design grids all day, so I kept my physical space orderly as a counterbalance. I never would have jammed the big knife into the wrong opening. It didn't even fit properly. The hilt was sitting at an awkward, upward angle. My first thought wasn't fear, it was confusion. Did I do that? Maybe I was more tired than I thought. Maybe in a sleep-deprived haze, I'd taken it out for some reason and put it back without thinking. But what reason? I hadn't used it. I hadn't cooked a meal that required it in weeks. I pulled the knife out. The blade was clean. I slid it back into its correct slot where it sat flush and neat. The order was restored, but my sense of unease lingered. I walked through the apartment, checking everything. The front door was deadbolted as always. The window locks were all fastened. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was missing. It was just a knife in the wrong slot. It was nothing, but it felt like a message. A quiet, subtle statement: I was here. I can touch your things. The incidents began to accumulate, like grains of sand forming a stone of dread in my gut. They were always small, always deniable. A book on my nightstand, which I was halfway through, was suddenly closed, the bookmark lying beside it on the table. The thermostat, which I kept religiously at 68 degrees, would be turned down to 65. My bathroom door, which I always left ajar to help with air circulation, would be pulled completely shut. Each time, I'd be hit with that same wave of cold confusion, followed by a desperate search for a rational explanation. Maybe a draft from the old windows had blown the book cover shut. Maybe the building's ancient thermostat was just faulty. Maybe I'd closed the bathroom door myself and simply forgotten. I was working long hours, not sleeping well. My memory could be failing me. I was becoming the unreliable narrator of my own life. The exhaustion was the worst part. Fear is a powerful stimulant, but it's an unsustainable one. After the initial adrenaline spike of finding something amiss, a deep, gnawing weariness would set in. I started sleeping in 4-hour, 3-hour, then 2-hour chunks. I'd wake up at the slightest sound, the gurgle of the pipes, the groan of the elevator down the hall, and I'd lie there in the dark, listening. The silence of my apartment was no longer peaceful. It was active, expectant. It felt like the held breath before a scream. I started double-checking, then triple-checking the locks before bed. I'd push on the door to make sure the deadbolt was truly engaged. I'd jiggle the latches on the windows. My nightly ritual became an obsessive compulsion. But the feeling of being watched, of not being alone, was relentless. It was a low-frequency hum beneath the surface of my daily life. I'd be sitting at my desk, trying to focus on a design schematic, and the hairs on the back of my neck would stand up. I'd spin around in my chair, expecting to see someone standing in the doorway to my office nook. There was never anyone there. The air would be still and empty, but the feeling would linger, a cold residue. The footsteps returned about 2 weeks after that first night. This time I was wide awake. It was just after 3 a.m. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. And then I heard it. Creak. It came from the living room, near the hallway. It was the familiar sound of that one specific floorboard, the one that popped like a knuckle. My blood ran cold. I didn't move a muscle, I just listened. Pop. There it was again, softer this time. A few seconds of silence passed, stretching into an eternity. Then a new sound, a soft, dragging shuffle. It was the sound of a sock-clad foot sliding across the old hardwood. It was slow, inquisitive, exploring. I couldn't breathe. My throat was clamped shut. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't the building settling. This was a person. A person was inside my apartment, moving through the dark. The sheer impossibility of it was what terrified me the most. 10th floor, locked door. How? The shuffling sound moved from the living room into the short hallway that led to the front door, the bathroom, and the kitchen. I heard another creak, this time from the board by the kitchen entrance. They were moving away from my bedroom, towards the front of the apartment. I lay there, paralyzed for what felt key hours. Every scenario played out in my head. A burglar, but what was there to steal? My laptop, my TV, they were still there. A stalker. The thought sent a jolt of ice through my veins. I waited until the first gray light of dawn began to filter through my window. Only then did I dare to move. I slid out of bed, my feet silent on the floor. I crept to my bedroom door and listened. Nothing. Taking a deep breath, I slowly, carefully pulled it open. The apartment was still and quiet. The morning light cast long shadows across the living room. Everything looked normal. My laptop was on my desk. The TV was on its stand. My wallet was on the entryway table where I'd left it. Nothing was gone. I walked to the front door. The deadbolt was still engaged. I checked it. It was solid. Then I checked the windows, all locked. The fire escape window securely latched from the inside. There was no sign of forced entry, no scuff marks on the doorframe, no scratches on the window sashes. It was as if a ghost had walked through the walls. But ghosts don't make floorboards creak. Ghosts don't have weight. That was the day the paranoia truly took root. I couldn't trust my own home anymore. The space that was once my sanctuary now felt like a cage I was sharing with something unseen. I stopped feeling safe anywhere inside it. I started leaving a light on in the living room when I slept. I bought a can of WD-40 and sprayed the hinges on every door, trying to eliminate any sound that wasn't my own. I even thought about getting a dog, but the building had a strict no pets policy. I called the building superintendent, a gruff old man named Mr. Henderson. I tried to sound casual. "Hey, just a quick question," I said. "Has there been any work done on the locks in the building recently, or any master keys gone missing?" He grunted on the other end of the line. "No, why?" "Oh, no reason," I lied, my voice tight. "Just curious, thanks." I knew how it would sound if I told him the truth. "I think someone is walking around in my locked apartment at night." He'd think I was crazy. Everyone would. So I kept it to myself. The fear became my secret, a corrosive thing I carried with me from room to room. I started losing weight. My eyes were ringed with dark, bruised-looking circles. I tried to work, but my focus was shattered. I'd find myself staring into space, listening, always listening. The silence was the worst. It was a canvas onto which my imagination could paint its most terrifying pictures. Every creak of the building was a footstep. Every rush of water through the pipes was a whisper. One evening, I was on a video call with a client, trying my best to sound professional and competent. We were discussing a color palette when I heard it again. A distinct click from the direction of my front door. It sounded like a lock disengaging. I froze mid-sentence. "Alex, you there?" The client's voice tinny through my headphones. "Yeah, sorry," I stammered, my eyes locked on the hallway. "Just thought I heard something." I muted my microphone and pulled off my headphones. I listened, my heart pounding. Silence. The deadbolt. I had to check the deadbolt. I made a quick excuse to the client, ended the call, and practically ran to the front door. I reached out a trembling hand and turned the knob on the deadbolt. It spun freely. It was unlocked. It was unlocked. But I had locked it when I came in that afternoon. I knew I had. It was an automatic muscle memory action. I could not lock it. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't in my head. This wasn't faulty memory or sleep deprivation. Someone had a key, or some other way in. a way that left no trace. That night I didn't even try to sleep. I dragged a heavy armchair from the living room and wedged it under the doorknob of my bedroom door. I bought a motion-activated security camera online, the kind that connects to your phone, and paid for express shipping. It would arrive in 2 days. Until then, I had to survive. The next night was quiet. The night after that, the camera arrived. It was a small, white plastic orb. I set it up on the bookshelf in my living room, angled to cover the front door and the main living area. I tested it, watching the live feed on my phone. The wide-angle lens distorted the room, making it look curved and strange, like a scene from a nightmare. That night, for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. I had a silent, unblinking witness. If something happened, I would have proof. I wouldn't be crazy anymore. I went to bed, the armchair still wedged under my door, my phone on the nightstand beside me, the camera app open. I watched the grainy, black and white image of my empty living room until my eyelids grew heavy. I woke up with a start. I wasn't sure what had woken me. The room was dark and silent. I checked my phone, 3:17 a.m. The live feed from the camera was still on the screen. The living room was empty, cast in the eerie, ghostly GL. Out of the camera's night vision, nothing was out of place. Then I saw it, a notification banner at the top of my screen. Motion detected in living room at 3:14 a.m. My breath hitched. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I tapped the notification. It took me to the recorded event, a short video clip just 15 seconds long. I pressed play. The video started. My empty living room. The first 5 seconds were still. Then, on the far right of the frame, a shape began to emerge from the hallway. It was tall and slender, a dark silhouette against the monochrome background. It moved without a sound. It didn't walk so much as it flowed into the room, a pillar of shadow. It paused in the center of the living room, directly in front of the camera, and it just stood there. It was completely featureless in the infrared light, a void in human form. It didn't seem to have a face. Its head was just a smooth, dark oval. It stood there for what felt like an eternity, but the timestamp showed it was only 6 seconds. It seemed to be looking around the room. Then it turned its head, slowly, deliberately, until it was looking directly at the camera. At me. The camera lens, the little blinking blue light, it knew. Then the figure raised a long, thin arm and pointed. It pointed directly at the bookshelf, at the camera. The video ended. I watched it again, and again. My mind reeled. The figure hadn't made a sound, the floorboards hadn't creaked. The motion sensor had been triggered by its movement alone. It was in my apartment, right now. The video was from 3 minutes ago. A new notification popped up on my phone. Motion detected in living room at 3:18 a.m. I didn't want to look, I had to. I tapped it. The new clip began to play. It showed the same scene, but the figure was gone. The room was empty again, but the video was 15 seconds long. I watched, my heart hammering against my ribs. Nothing happened. The video was about to end, and then in the last second I saw it. A flicker of movement. The door to my bedroom, visible in the background, which I had barricaded with a chair, slowly, silently began to swing inward. The clip ended. It was in my room. The sound of my own blood roaring in my ears was deafening. I was no longer in my apartment. I was in a tomb. The air was thick, heavy, impossible to breathe. I couldn't scream. My lungs were paralyzed. I squeezed my eyes shut, a primal, childish instinct to make the world go away. If I can't see it, it can't see me. Then I heard it. The sound that will haunt me for the rest of my life. A soft, wet, whispery sound. The sound of breathing, but it wasn't my own frantic, shallow gasps. This was slow and deep and ragged, and it was coming from the foot of my bed. I lay there petrified for an unknown amount of time. Every second was a universe of terror. The world had shrunk to the space of my mattress, the darkness, and that horrible, steady sound. Inhale, exhale. It was a patient sound, a predator's sound. I don't know what possessed me to do it. some morbid, self-destructive curiosity, a need to see the thing that had invaded my life and shattered my sanity. Slowly, so slowly my muscles screamed in protest, I opened my eyes. Just a crack. The room was not completely dark. The faint, ambient glow of the Chicago night seeped through my window, casting everything in shades of gray and deep shadow. At the foot of my bed, a figure was sitting. It was just a silhouette, a vaguely human-shaped patch of absolute blackness. It was sitting perfectly still, its back to me, facing the window. It was from this shape that the breathing sound was coming. My mind simply broke. It couldn't process what I was seeing. A person was sitting on my bed in my locked and barricaded room on the 10th floor. The sheer, logical impossibility of it was a wall I couldn't climb. The figure didn't move. It just sat there, breathing its slow, ragged breaths. It seemed to be looking out the window at the city lights. Was it watching me, or was it just waiting? I lay there, feigning sleep, my body rigid, my mind a vortex of pure, undiluted fear. Minutes bled into an hour. The city's distant hum was the only other sound. The figure remained, unmoving, breathing. I must have lost consciousness at some point, a mercy fainting brought on by overwhelming terror, because the next thing I knew, the gray light of dawn was filling the room. I was alone. The armchair was still wedged under my bedroom doorknob, untouched. The breathing sound was gone. The presence was gone. But on the foot of my bed, where the figure had been sitting, the duvet was indented. A clear, perfect impression of where someone had been sitting. A slight depression in the fabric. Proof. I didn't pack. I grabbed my wallet, my keys, and my phone, and I walked out of that apartment. I didn't look back. I left my clothes, my computer, my entire life behind. I took the stairs, all 10 flights, unable to bear tea. He thought of being in the enclosed space of the elevator. I walked out into the cold morning air, and I just kept walking. I called my landlord from a coffee shop a mile away. I told him there was a family emergency and I had to break my lease. I'd pay whatever penalty. He grumbled but agreed. I told him to throw everything out. He could keep the security deposit. I didn't care. The police, what would I have told them? What would I have shown them? A grainy video of a shadow, an indentation on my bedspread. They would have sent me for a psychiatric evaluation, and maybe they would have been right. I bought a bus ticket and rode for 2 days, ending up in a city I'd never been to before, on the other side of the country. I got a room in a cheap motel and I tried to sleep, but sleep doesn't come easily anymore. It's been 6 months. I have a new apartment now. It's on the ground floor. I need to be able to see the grass outside my window. I have 3 locks on my front door and 2 on the back. I have bars on the windows. I've taped over the camera on my new laptop. I don't own a knife block. I still have the videos from that night saved on my phone, encrypted in a secure folder. Sometimes, in the dead of night, when the doubt starts to creep in, when I start to wonder if it really was all in my head, a product of stress and exhaustion, I watch them. I watch the silent, shadowy figure flow into my living room. I watch it turn and point at the camera. I watch my bedroom door swing open. And I remember. I never found out who it was or what it was, or how it got into a locked 10th floor apartment without leaving a single trace. I don't know what it wanted. If it had wanted to harm me, it could have done so easily as I slept. But it didn't. It just came in, moved my things, walked around, and watched me. That to me is the most terrifying part. The purpose of it all remains a perfect, horrifying blank. I live my life now in a state of constant, low-grade vigilance. Every creak of a floorboard, every unexpected noise sends a jolt of the old fear through me. I feel like I'm always looking over my shoulder, even in my own home. The sanctuary is gone forever. It's not the locks that matter, I've learned. It's not the height, not the 10 stories of steel and concrete. There are some things that can get in no matter what you do. They don't need a key. They just arrive. And you're left with the silence that follows and the question that echoes in it forever. Why?